Hi, and welcome back to day 5 of the Archer Sew Along. Today we'll be assembling our button bands. This is a pretty easy step, so we're just going to dive right in. Alright, to begin we're going to start with the left front. So take that and lay it out with the wrong side facing up. Here you can see we've already fused, so we can ignore that step right now. We're going to head over to our iron and we'll be folding the button band over to create the left front button band. All right, so here we have the left side facing wrong side up. We're going to fold the edge over 1 inch. And this will meet the edge of the interfacing, but I like to use a seam gauge as well just to make sure I'm actually folding it over 1 inch. And this is linen, so I'm using a bit of steam. And just work your way down to the bottom. Now we're going to fold this over again to conceal the raw edge. If you have any long strings like this, you can either cut them off or just tuck them inside. So again, fold 1 inch. And I should have noted already, that the notches at the top and the bottom align with these 1 inch fold lines. So just press from the top to the bottom. And then I like to place a few pins through here. I'm using these flower head pins so you can hopefully more easily see them as I work. Then we're going to head over to the machine and we're going to sew along this folded edge to secure the button band in place. All right, now that we're at the machine, you can see I'm using an edge stitch foot. So this little piece here, it aligns with the folded edge, and just make sure you stitch in a straight line along it. And I sew this with the wrong side facing up. That way I make sure I'm catching this edge. So lower your presser foot. You're going to want to do a little back tack. Remove your pins as you get to them. Then I do another back tack and snip your threads. After I sew across, I like to just give it a little press. I feel like it sets the stitches a bit, and just you can make sure everything's nice and neat. Turn it over and check the back just to make sure you caught your entire button band. Again, I sewed with the back facing up, so I know that I did. And that is it for the left front. You can stitch a line along the center front if you want. I don't usually for the left front. So I'm done with the left front, and it's time to move on to the right. All right, now for the right front, if you remember back to our cutting post, we trimmed off the front edge. So the right front is narrower than the left, and that's because we're going to be attaching this button band on. So take your button band, and the side you fused is going to go towards the front, the center front. So align those. And pin it in place. And when I'm pinning, I usually pin the two edges, then the center, then I do centers from there. It's just something that I found works really well for a variety of pinning applications. There is also a notch here, so you can make sure you're attaching the right sides of the button band. So you can put a pin through that notch if you want as well. So once that's pinned, we're going to head over to the machine. All right, we're now going to sew along this edge using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So find the 1/2 inch on your machine. It's that point there. Lower your presser foot and begin sewing. You're going to want to do a small back tack. And as you sew, just make sure that the two edges are aligned. Sorry, I'm going slow so my camera doesn't bounce. Once you get to the end, back tack. Raise your presser foot and trim your threads. Now we're going to head back over to the table for our next step. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to grade this seam allowance. And if you're unfamiliar with grading, basically you're trimming the seam allowance down in a graded pattern, like you're going downstairs. So that way, when you flip things over, you flip the button band over, it's not just a giant dip down over the two seam allowances. It's a graded descent into the button band. So we're going to be trimming the top seam allowance, that is the seam allowance of the button band, in half. And you can use duckbill scissors. I am not good at using duckbill scissors, so I just use my regular scissors. So you're just going to come in and you're just going to trim that seam allowance down. thread stuck there. And you don't need to really worry about the seam allowance fraying because you have it fused to the interfacing. We're also going to be top stitching, so it's really not going to be a problem. So now discard this piece. And here you can see the button band is cut down. The seam allowance of the shirt is still the full size. All right, we are now going to press the button band away from the front of the shirt. All right, so here it is, pressed nice and flat. You can see on the back, everything is going towards the button band. You need to press under your seam allowance, and that's a 1/2 inch. So you're gonna take your seam gauge, and again, you're just gonna work from one end to the other. Making sure that you're pressing that under. Mine keeps, the gauge on my seam gauge keeps slipping. It's kind of old. Try not to press or steam your fingers like I just did. And let that cool for a second. Now we're going to be folding this over to create the button band. So our next step is folding the button band over to create the button band. And you're going to want to sew this from the front so that everything looks nice and is straight with the front of the shirt. But when you do that, you have to sort of worry about catching the back. So a trick for this is fold your button band and just, here's where the seam line is. You're just going to fold this over, not to the seam line, but you're going to fold it over just a tiny bit more, like a 1/16 of an inch, so that it covers, just covers the seam line. That way when you stitch from the front, you're sure to catch the back. Just go from one end to the other. And this is a very shifty linen, so you can see it's kind of scooted its way up as I press. So you can go back in and straighten that out and then give that a press if you have the same problem. Then again, we're going to pin. And when you pin, make sure you're not pinning in and it's moving. You want to make sure you're pinning in and everything's staying in its right place. All right, now we'll head over to the machine. All right, now we're going to sew along this seam line on the button band. So align your fabric, and again, I'm using my edge stitch foot. And make sure you take out your pins before you get to that part. Back tack. Remove your pins as you approach. So at this point, you want to just turn it over and check your back and make sure that you got the entire back. And if you didn't, you can either take out the stitching, or say I had missed this part, you can just go in with a needle and thread and slip stitch. Now the next thing I like to do, since this is the front of the garment, is I like to do a line of stitching along the center front. That way it's even, it just looks nice. All right, then again, I just like to give it a press. Make sure everything's sitting nice and flat. Make sure it looks good on the front and the back, and we're all set. All right, so that is it for sewing our front button bands. It was a pretty easy, quick lesson. So go ahead and get that done. And if you have any questions, just let me know in the comments below. You can subscribe to our channel to make sure you don't miss any videos. And we'll be back next time with pockets. All right, I'll see you then. Bye.